Journalism matters. Journalists matter. And newsrooms matter. Which brings me to Sanef. Sanef needs you. Sanef needs every single person in this room. If you're not yet a member and you qualify, I really encourage you to become a member, to join us, because together we can protect journalism. And only together can we defend media freedom. Only together can we push back against a system that too often prioritizes money over people, bottom lines over editorial excellence, and financial spreadsheets over strong and healthy newsrooms. Support Sanef, please, so that Sanef can continue supporting us as an industry. Because breaking through glass ceilings isn't just an event at Emoyeni on a Thursday night when we could have been watching Netflix. It's not something we diarize once a year, maybe every few years. This is a movement. It is hard work, and it happens every single day in every single newsroom. It should. It means refusing to accept the unacceptable, refusing to normalize the abnormal, and having the courage to call out the indefensible. We are not pieces of fruit, and our experience is not negotiable. Our value is not determined by somebody else's spreadsheet, and our leadership in this space, the leadership of women, is not a luxury. Our voices are not optional, because when glass ceilings are shattered, and tonight in this room we've got many examples of women who over the years have shattered those ceilings, then anything becomes possible.
This book is dedicated to all women who speak out loudly, not softly, loudly, but also dedicated to women who have left the newsroom because social media was too traumatic to bear. You are forced to be on social media if you're a journalist today. Did you know that? And the world of disinformation is hard for all of us to know what's true and what's not true, whether we've got good instincts for it or not. And in this world of journalism and fact checkers, we are losing daily, as Katy just pointed out. Arena sold to Ubuntu. Those journalists didn't get paid. Well, now they've been paid. ENCA has just announced 171 out of 309 journalists will be gone by the end of this year. Media 24, the biggest digital news outlet in the country, is axing people too through their restructuring. And then we have New Media Group, which we hadn't heard of, who have to apply for licenses for their titles. It's actually horrific. And in this kind of world, there's a lack of nuance. We have binary oppositions. We have polarizing echo chambers, affirmation bias. So in other words, the more you're looking at something, the more the same things that people are going to send you. And how do we address this information? How we address this information crisis in 2026 onwards is going to be key to our future of wanting to live in a democracy, one that deepens rather than is squeezed out by authoritarianism, and all the values that come with that. The background to this work is that the world is now full of conspiracy theorists preaching nationalistic vibes steeped in xenophobia. And central to this right-wing populism are manospheres pushing a view that men are victims. That's global. We are looking at the local, where there's a huge overlap. Whatever's happening globally is happening in South Africa too. And the local that we're looking at is we're looking at the glass ceilings against the backdrop of right-wing populism. 75% of women in our survey said that their barrier to progress is cyber misogyny and what's happening online. This is a 45 percentage point increase from the last glass ceiling of 2018. Then people said this may be an emerging trend. Well, now it's entrenched. Could you please tell us about your earliest experiences of being announced editor at the Mail and Guardian? The skeptics, the raised eyebrows, and what you felt internally. And can you talk about the recent July 2026 Twitter storm, X storm, that triggered you into writing a tweet about an all-white FM currency staff pic that was posted? When you read that tweet, you started talking about the little black book that you created. Ferial.
As I get much older now, I almost tend to forget, like, just how difficult it was when I was appointed editor of the Mail and Guardian, because what preceded that was an absolute nightmare for me, where colleagues who heard that a woman might become editor of this pioneering publication went to the board and complained. They said, she's simply not strong enough. She doesn't have the balls for the job. She can't run an investigative title. So when you come to a job like that in such a way, it's an enormously frightening thing to come face to face with the patriarchy that way, Glenda. So that was the start, and I can't believe that so many years on, when I looked at the picture that made all of us quite angry about the currency news that caused the latest storm you're speaking about, it took me back to a moment at the Financial Mail where I had noticed that all of our columnists were white and mostly all were male except for one, and we had about 6 or 8 columnists. So one day, very meekly in the conference, I picked up my hand and I said, excuse me, why don't we have any black or women columnists? And you could hear a pin drop then. And the answer that quickly came back was, we just can't find any. And that's just the same kind of rationale that you still hear expressed today. And thereafter, I went on to start the Little Black Book, because say there's lots of black people in engineering, in mining, in everything. And then the Book of Women. But 30 years on, that we should still be needing that, I think tells you about how far we have to go. And of course, that's the story of the glass ceilings report.
Patricia, can you tell us what are the progressions and retrogressions in the fight against sexism in South Africa? What are the big differences that you've noticed in 2006, 2018, and 2026?
Over the successive reports that we've produced looking into sexism in the media and the barriers to women's advancement and progress, there's been a gradual improvement in the numbers in newsrooms. Gender parity achieved fairly quickly by the second report. But what happens is that this picture is skewed, and as you go up the echelons and the hierarchy into senior newsroom leadership, into management decisions, positions and decision making, women are absent, and especially black women. And the answer, Glenda, is that yes, there's progress and there are transgressions. But just to think about it for a moment. So, for example, by the second glass ceiling report in 2018, it seemed that the glass ceiling was starting to be broken. And just as one example is that women in senior management, in top management, there'd been 6% had been black women only in 2006, and this jumped to 30%. But today, this is still sitting in senior newsroom levels and leadership only at 22% of where there are gender parity, and in 33% of our 2026 newsrooms surveyed, where we had the data, only are women in leadership positions. So, and then there are regressions by the same token. In that second report, it seemed that the pay gap was widening. And the pay gap had been 21% on average between men and women in the first report in 2006. So another part of the answer is that no, we're not seeing the big differences we want to see between the reports. And women are still complaining, as we heard the jokes today from from Katy, sexism in newsrooms, patriarchal practices and cultures in the hierarchy and in the media institutions, and the Old Boys Club apparently has now morphed a second time and shapeshifted as it did in 2018 and presently, possibly into an old girls club or to include men and women. But there is a big shift, and the big shift we see in 2026 is that the struggle against sexism moves online. And women in the South African media are now facing a cyber ceiling, in addition to the barriers they are still facing in the media institutions. And this is the big jump you've referred to already, to 74.5% of women in the current 2026 survey, confirming cyber violence and targeting online, and that had only been about 30% of women and 9% of men in the previous 2019 report. So we also had a look, this report, at AI and the gender dimensions of slup suits. And while that wasn't conclusive or just mixed results, it is an indication that what we're actually looking at here is that the targeting of women has also moved into the public sphere and online. And it's time to speak up and, of course, to encourage those media institutions who've not corrected the gender balance in their hierarchies to do so urgently, so journalists can deliver their role in a democracy, as we've already heard. But the bigger challenge is going to be to deal with the fact that those misogynist attitudes are now online and the targeting is now in the public sphere. So it is no small challenge we have, and we are proud of those institutions who did report actively seeking women leaders, who have gender-balanced newsrooms and women leading the news operations.
Can you tell us what struck you about the women's word? So in the survey, they're anonymous. So people do say what they want, and it's the first time we did a glass ceilings where we only interviewed or we only surveyed women.
One key one is the fact that this is critical research, and it is, although 20 years old, it's groundbreaking in its own right, in a sense that it for the first time highlights intersectionality of our feminist movement. You know, the fact that our struggle as South African women is not just as feminists, it is intersectional. We are Black, we are white, we Indian, we colored, and all of that renders itself in very different experiences in our daily lives and how we receive or are treated by the patriarchy that still, unfortunately, as we all know, owns us. So I think that this research is really groundbreaking in the sense that it centers the Busadi framework and hyper intersectionality, which is to say that instead of always looking to the global north, for the first time we can actually look at the local research as feminist researchers and have conversations from a local perspective. So that's the first thing, that it is 20 years old, but it is groundbreaking in the sense that for the first time it highlights the intersectionality of the fight. The second one is that it looks inward for the first time. I think the first two looked to the man and it blamed the man. I think this one, I think this one is very interesting in a sense that we call each other out. We use words like old girls club, you know, and that is scary because what we have seen is that with our little accumulation of power and a little bit accumulation of authority, we've started to act like the man. We've created little caste systems as women within ourselves. We are factional, we are competitive, and it displays itself through a very toxic male gaze, which really regresses us. You know, and for me it is groundbreaking because the previous reports we were saying, we're looking at systems, we're looking at all the barriers externally. This one for me, it says, hold on, ladies, what are we doing? So for me, that is quite important, alongside the Old Boys Club and of course the cyber misogyny.
What, Sophie, in your in closing the legal gaps is the most important step that can be taken ASAP. Why do you and Tina Parr say this in your chapter?
In the chapter, we highlight one global survey that tells us that when journalists are attacked online, they self-censor. 30% of journalists in a global survey cited within our chapter stated that they considered leaving the profession entirely after being targeted online, while 40% said that they rather avoided reporting on certain topics. And this has a direct result on press freedom and the right of the public to access information and to know what's happening in their country. What we mean by the fact that these remedies are reactive is the fact that they put the burden on the journalist to gather evidence, to know who is attacking them, to navigate expensive and lengthy court processes. And when you consider the fact that the harassment is probably ongoing during this entire process, that is a big burden to put on one person. So, if you ask us, the single most important next step is to ensure that we have technical training for police officers, for magistrates, and for judicial officers working in these spaces. They should know what doxing is, what is a coordinated campaign, and how is it different to an individual threat? How do you find out who an anonymous person is and how to access their account? And so specialized training came up in our chapter for two reasons. The first is because it's our most immediate avenue. While we wait for laws and international frameworks governing platform accountability, we can start the training now. The great news is that many of these initiatives are already underway. So Alt Advisory has partnered with Moxie Africa, and we have developed a handbook for judicial officers on how to adjudicate online harms. And we are currently in the process of implementing training for these purposes. In addition, during this month, in addition to relaunching the judge's handbook, we will launch the police handbook for similar topics, because they are the first port of call and the people that journalists and women being targeted are interacting with.
Can you tell everyone what SLAPs are and how the international differs from the national case, our famous case of Karen Moore? And your chapter was the only one who actually dealt with other women in other countries and what happened to them. A lot of them actually got killed.
This war on women, and we have it every single day. Your Facebook feed is littered with women's faces who've been killed, murdered, and so on. That is the end product of a war against women that's now moved onto that online space. And what's happened with SLAPs is that they are aimed at, they serve to inflame this kind of online war against women. As soon as you say a journalist is being sued, many people switch off. What they hear is the journalist is bad, right? And so that sentiment sticks in their head. It inflames those sharks. They start to circle on social media, and some of it is detailed in the book as to the kind of online trolling that happens with those women over time. So we know over time what happens is that women are walking away from these positions. We talk a lot in the media about juniorization. A large part of that is senior colleagues who move away because they have the experience that will secure them jobs elsewhere. They have the ability to look for safety. They are walking away because their lives and livelihoods are threatened. Many of these women are mothers. They are the ones who are taking their kids to school. There is relational harm that is possible where their children are in the line of fire. So SLAPs have a far-reaching impact. It's not just a case that's taken up in a court. It has a ripple impact on the work of that individual and their ability to operate safely.
The boys' club is an open secret. I can sit here and name, the people that have benefited from the boys' club, but I don't want to be sued. I'm a single mother of two. But I mean, we can talk about it, that how Black men always find a soft landing. They can go out of the industry, go on a sabbatical and, pursue other things that they want to do. And if those fail, they always know that the newsroom is open and ready for them. And they're not gonna come back and go on the field. The top job is waiting for them, either as an editor or as a head of department, however you wanna call it. And
of course, this environment has been made easier because even some of these media houses are owned by men, right? So, and some of these men either drink together, they play golf together, and if one of them is out of a job, they can always pick up a call, hey, Mchana, it's bad, and Mchana is gonna make a plan, right?
Kate, what's the difference between the situation on sexism for women in community media compared to mainstream?
I just want to talk to four quick issues about what makes this a particularly hard area. And I want to say that what we talked about was concrete ceilings. We didn't talk about glass because we thought that the sector was so hard that concrete was actually a kind of more appropriate kind of analogy. So the first thing I think that we need to point out is that there are actually very few women in the community media sector, which is a strange one because often people have this perception, it's a very poor, very marginal sector, and therefore women would be here. And if you look at the numbers, they're literally 25% of print and online are women, which means that you're then in a really small minority, which makes life very difficult. So let us just look at the issues of safety. And I hear what everybody is saying about cyber misogyny and those kinds of things, and it is harsh. But I want to say that in the community media sector, it's physical. You're living in the community. Your children are going to the community school, to the clinic, etc. And you literally do not cover particular stories because you cannot actually get protection because you're not in you're not in a metropolitan area. You haven't necessarily got like a Sanef, behind you. You're tiny, and so a lot of stories literally do not get told because of that. People have a sense of, AI, that's not something that community media will really be utilizing. But the thing is, community journalists love AI, love tech, but they don't have the paid for versions. You've always got like the crappy computer, the worst kind of cell phone you could possibly imagine. If it's a Nokia, that's what you've got. And it's interesting because there are a number of community operations that have taken a lot of young women on board to do social media. They've done a great job. And yet it's interesting because it's young women that are doing that kind of work. It's the TikTok girl suddenly. That is the post that is really, poorly paid. And, you're an intern. You get paid nothing at all.
How far can we go with that, and what should be done more than building resilience in journalists, amongst journalists, and women in particular?
One of the most incredible sessions that we had was with community media, and we were horrified because we heard two stories. One was by somebody who said that there was a 5,000 Rand hit on their life by a gang leader in the area, in the community in which they work and report, and it was posted on Facebook. And another one who was abducted, stuffed into the boot of the car and driven around, all community journalists. So the issues are definitely there, and there's definitely a need for it. The question then becomes, who is responsible for it? And I think, if I could get on top of the Hillbrow Tower and start saying that it's about time that media owners prioritize this far more than what they're actually doing, because we've got to be able to see that we're putting reporters in the front line. We're asking them to report, to meet these deadlines, to give us these incredible stories, because if it were not for them, if it were not for these reports, we wouldn't know. But then, how are you holding them together after that? The onus, of course, is on the media owner and editors and senior editors. I'm also quite appalled, by the way, at how many senior editors do not have this in place. Many do, and I applaud them. But how many senior editors do not have this in place for their newsrooms? And it was quite telling, because when we do these training sessions across the country, we separate them out for journalists and for editors. And in Johannesburg, we got such a poor response to the editors session.
And I know there's a lot on the go. There always is, and there are always breaking stories. But at some point, we've got to prioritize it. So I think the onus is definitely on editors, on media owners. I think as journalists ourselves and as young journalists, particularly the young journalists. And I'm so encouraged because, to your point as well, so many of these sessions are filled with these young, dewy eyed journalists who often say, I don't think I can do this for much longer. And I think I have to go. And we can't afford that as an industry. We cannot afford to do that. We're not going to be here forever. We have to walk off the stage at some point. We need them.
What needs to be done? What can be done ASAP about the situation? So many different layers of the situation, but you know what I'm talking about.
We have a piece of legislation called Occupational Health and Safety. Why aren't newsrooms putting systems in place to ensure that that protects even the people who are out in the field, because that's a workplace hazard? So why aren't we doing it? And in fact, if you go back to the studies that have been done, this is the 3rd edition. I would want us to go back and look at what newsrooms have done since the first study. So I do think that there's an opportunity to actually review the findings in terms of implementation and the recommendations that would have been made in the first and the second editions. And then we will be moving towards the 3rd. But it does look like it's becoming a problem. So the issue for me is, if you are leaving your employees and you are not treating cyber misogyny as an operational risk which poses health and safety issues to your employees, what do you hope to achieve? And it's amazing for me that media owners, as you have made reference to, media owners will make and provide for investments on cybersecurity, legal liabilities, and everything else, but the human aspect of the risk is not dealt with. So there's a challenge there, and I'm hoping that there are media owners who are here who must deal with the issue. If we appoint representatives, which is a requirement for that act, that you train representatives to deal with first aid and all other things, how is it that newsrooms don't have protocols to deal with the emerging threat of misogyny and the implications on employee welfare? So we actually need to deal with that and provide psychosocial support. So newsrooms need to have escalation pathways that will give everyone a sense of care, because what we also miss, and I speak about this in the section that I've done in reviewing the report, the fact that owners are abandoning their duty of care is a huge problem. And what it does, you have women who are leading newsrooms who have to navigate the gap between providing that duty of care to their journalists and the lack of support, whether it's budgets, whether it's all the resources they require to actually make sure that that happens. And what does it do in the middle? That gap is the moral injuries that newsroom leaders face, particularly women. Because you're sitting with a problem you can't solve. The duty of care you want to provide, but you don't have the resources to do so because it's not provided for by media owners. And it's something that we need to deal with. I was reading the chapters and thinking, is it a cyber ceiling? Is it not a cyber cliff? It is a cliff. Because if you have a journalist, if like your women journalists who are out there doing the work, they're exposed to all the stuff that's happening online. What happens? The benefit to the media owner is the fact that you get exposure and you get visibility, and it can easily translate into your pocket as a media owner. But when the downside comes, which is the harassment, you step back and you leave it to the journalist to deal with the issue. How is that? And why are we allowing it? Yeah. And also related to the matter of the cliff, which we only see in the attrition statistics when women leave newsrooms. And it's because they don't have the support they require. they don't have the support they must provide to the employees in their newsrooms across the board, not just female employees or women employees. But the fact that you put a burden as media owners on newsroom leaders, particularly women, to literally take care, and I hate this because when Katie introduced herself, she said, "I'm a chairperson of Sanef," and I wish we could all say that when we introduce ourselves and not say, "I take care of," because it starts with the language. So media owners must ensure that media leaders, particularly women, have the resources they require to address the issues as arise in the newsrooms. The instruments that are available at a regional level, we have the Kigali Declaration, and it speaks to the tools that newsrooms should develop or put in place to ensure that all these issues, the online harms, are dealt with. We have the recent M20 Johannesburg Declaration. It also points us to the right direction in terms of what we need to do. But are we putting those things in place? I mean, the Kigali Declaration from the African Women in Media is sort of an aged kind of tool, but have we tried to implement that? And in fact, AWIM is going to be setting up a South African chapter, and we are looking at many others. But these are the things that we need to do. And the support from civil society. Our CSOs are doing a lot of work. And I do think that we should not underestimate what we can achieve if we're to lean on their resources, because we don't have the resources. And the fact that we're sitting here and it's Sanef, and we talk about the Sanef, the training that Sanef provides to journalists in terms of safety and mental wellness and all the stuff. You literally, and I've never seen this, and I doubt if there's any other industry, at least in South Africa, that operates the way we do, where you have employees being editors, taking care of the survival of the sector in so many ways, providing support, mobilizing resources to train newsrooms. And these are employees themselves trying to sustain a sector. Where are the media owners? And where is the population that reads and that depends on the material that we produce as newsrooms?